I want to come from here to the fifth point, diversification of society. Possibly we didn't spend enough time together, or we spent too much time together. He would say, classical point, differentiation is about three stages. Segmentary differentiation, segments of society just doing the same, the small clans, basically small units and doing the same. You have thousands within an area. They are different from each other, but they are same if you compare them. Then we talk about stratification, or he talks about stratification differentiation. The stratification of society, of having groups with different strata, different social status. The social status is what is actually decisive here, and we have different strata according to which society is differentiated. Now, the last point where he arrives is the functional differentiation. We have different functions. We have a legal system, we have an economic system, we have a social system, we have even a system of love. It's all parts of different systems where we function in different ways. You find this in social science in different formulations. For instance, when we talk about roles. In the morning, I am father, bringing my little child to school or to the kindergarten. Then I'm changing my role. I'm employer or employee in this and that area, or I'm professional, having a different role as well. I'm not father anymore. I'm only lawyer. I'm only producing cars or whatsoever. Then I may go for a break, and there I'm I don't know what, I'm just friend of others, meeting, gathering for lunch, going back into my work role, going back in the evening and being theater lover, which may be another role I am doing. But at the same time, as I said, I'm not entirely convinced that this fits, that this really explains entirely our situation. Because we have ongoing segmentary differentiation, and we have as well different strata. So diversification is for me as well very much a matter of the relationship of different classes to each other within this functionally differentiated systems. I pointed out the meaning of accumulation regimes and modes of regulation. These are decisive of which roles we actually take. There's nothing wrong with a view on functional differentiation, I think, but we have to qualify it and say it comes from how we order the world, or how the world is ordered in terms of the accumulation regime and in terms of the mode of regulation. Here we find the definition, and a very powerful definition, of different roles, different functions we have and we obtain in society. What we find with this system going further is as well that we have different roles in the different areas of this triangle. As I said, state, political system, market or economic system, and civil society as system of negotiations. All this has to be seen in a certain environment. All this has to be seen in a certain national tradition. And all this is differentiated in itself. If you go to any enterprise today, be it small or large, they do not produce all. They produce only certain segments, and they are part of different sectors. The classical division there, or the classical distinction, is primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector, agriculture or raw materials, production and services. You can apply different ways of dividing the sector. You have as well, within the political system, I said, the separation of power, but you can go even further. You have the social policy, unfortunately. You have, unfortunately, the separate issue of economic policy. You have environment policy, so don't bother about the environment if you are in the economic sphere. It is a real problem if you go and make policies, if you are involved in these processes. This segmentation, this differentiation and departmentalization is a serious problem to overcome these borders because you are stuck in your different departments. The third area, I use the term which is used traditionally, the area of the third sector, or the non-governmental, non-profit sector, is differentiated in itself as well. And I just want to point, or to name the major issues there. Today, we have traditionally the cooperatives. Cooperative sector. Don't mix it up with cooperative sector. It's about cooperation, and it is about mastering power relations. Power relations in terms of the different sectors to each other, but as well in terms of what is actually the meaning of the different elements of production. So traditionally you find these cooperatives in the areas of consumption, of banking, financial services, and of production. You find them in different ways in different countries. And I said on another occasion, it is as well a means very much about inclusion, integrating people. For instance, in Italy, you would have special legal status for cooperatives that have a task, a social task to fulfill, and this is the inclusion of disabled people. I think it's the type B cooperation, legally defined, and they have to employ a certain amount of disabled people, people with disabilities, or disabled people, meaning people who are disabled by our societies. And society makes good by providing not a sheltered employment, but providing a cooperative framework where they can unfold, where they can develop themselves. You have another section of this third sector, the mutualities. Mutualities. It's especially from the French, the mutualité, coming from there and saying we have not least to overcome the loss of bonds. Family structures breaking away and resources breaking away, resources from the traditional being together, and we have to pull together our resources to make good for these, for the loss of these bonds. It is something where it's not only about bringing resources together, but it is as well about bringing resources together under a certain idea. We support ourselves mutually. It's not about I collect for you and that's fine. I collect for you because you are poor, you can't help yourself. But it is something, at the end of the day, we do something for us together. It was very much in the insurance sector, health insurance, social insurance sectors, that these mutualities developed. Then we have a third area of the third sector, the associations. A variety of associations of different forms in legal terms, in terms of what they are about. And in one way or another, you can say they had been about securing particularistic interests. Associations looking for the protection of something. It was not necessarily something that was there in the general interest, in a wider interest, but it had been people gathering to do something that they thought is important. And for which is not any provision available in the wider area of society. Sports associations, charities, looking after children, self-help organizations, many different issues being tackled, many different forms, and not least something that is there as well in different areas, in different societies. I'll come back at the end of this section to this. Foundations as the fourth main area, and the last one. Foundations simply, even if there's nothing simple on this world, simply pooling resources. Similar to the mutualities, but at the same time very different. Because you pool resources because you have resources or somebody has resources and wants to do something with these resources, not himself or herself, but wants to support something which actually he cannot do. Foundations in the arts is one area. Foundations in social areas are something pursuing a specific aim, political aim. You have in Germany, for instance, the foundations run by the parties. You would have Social Democratic Foundation, you would have Christian Democratic Foundation, you would have a Liberal Foundation, and you would have a Green Foundation, and you would have a Left Foundation, whatsoever. There's a certain regulatory framework for it, there's a certain legislative framework for it, and these people come together to pursue, again, a particularistic interest, but in a different term. And not least different in terms of getting resources from outside. No, not in terms of material resources. That's actually the idea of this foundation. We have the material resources and we can pay no others to do what we think is good and should be done. An association is usually very poor, doesn't have any money, and looks for money, or if you don't have money, join them, do the work. Donations are a major principle of financing these organizations. As I said, all this depends very much as well on a national framework, on national traditions. And one important point where I saw this was actually when I talked to a friend in Amsterdam about the Dutch culture, about Dutch ways of organizing things. They are very pragmatic, and it's said that in some countries you find as soon as you have 7 people gathering, because 7 people is the minimum, legal requirement, as soon as you have 7 people, you found an association. In the Netherlands, it's different. As soon as there is any idea, you found a foundation. Everything is organized around foundations. And the reason why he said, the reason behind it is something very simple. A large part of the Netherlands is Netherlands being lowlands, and it is beneath the water, beneath the 0 point, which means you need dikes. And for building dikes, you need money. And some people have had money, but they didn't have the workforce and they couldn't simply buy or build these bases, the dikes on the basis of money. So it was at the same time in the interest of everybody to have this dike. Meaning you come together, somebody has this kind of resource, somebody else has this kind of resource, you build, you found a foundation. A very simple thing. Charities are a typical example of, if you do not have a state welfare system, as it had been the case in the early Manchester capitalism, if you do not have even the idea of having some state provision, if you have a laissez-faire state, as it was typical with Smithian economics, you say, still, okay, there are some poor people, and I have pity with them, I pity them, and I want to do something. So I go there, I have my, not foundation, but my charity, and I am good to these people. It perfectly matches the system of Smith, having the wealth of nation on the one hand, and on the other hand, the system of being good, of morals. You have associations there, and you have the mutualities, as I said, in France. Égalité, fraternité, égalité, fraternité, and what's the third? I always forget them, I should know them. Anyway, you have these three values, and it is from there that you say it's a right, and it's this mutuality that emerges from there, and we have to look at it in these terms of being mutually responsible. Actually, it matches quite well with the idea of the absolutist state. An ongoing tradition. France is the most centralized state in the Western world, and it is the way of l'état c'est moi, I am the state, which means on the one hand you have the central body, the king, who represents the state, but it is as well, I am the state and we do something together, this understanding of mutuality. And you know much better than I the meaning of foundations here in Finland, being as well emerging as well from a tradition of people living in very distant places, living remote places, being forced in a way by nature to cooperate, if you want, and being forced as well in this way to cooperate on the interest. We are not just producing products, but we are maintaining actually as well that we can produce products, because we cannot do it on our own. This gives at least some ideas, some insight in the idea of what diversification of society is about, differentiation. It is about segments and stratification and functional systems, but it is as well about finding a certain way of linking these different areas. So it is very much about these organizations building bridges between different systems. You find the traditional view on it, which looks at exactly this of non-governmental organization. Non-governmental means they relate, nevertheless, to the government, to the political process, because otherwise they are non-profit organizations, doing something, producing something, and nevertheless not doing it for profit, not doing it in the main area of society's economics. Leaving it there, looking at diversification of society, I want to come to the sixth part, the definition of interest.